Welcome to another episode of the Quoggling Sand podcast. Today, as I record this, it is the 8th of June, 2021. It's later in the day than normal. I would normally, I've been trying to do these Monday night or Tuesday morning. I was thrown off a little bit, but that is the beginning. That's the start of the episode today. Ideation. Ideate like a boss. Ideation is when you have ideas, when you come up with solutions to problems, for example. It's something that I witnessed quite often at hackathons and, well, I mean, in engineering, there's a lot of creative solutions. That's part of the job. So ideation is a common occurrence, but it's always fun to see. It's always fun to be a part of. And while at the gym in the morning, I tend to go at unusual times because it's empty. Because normally I don't go to chit chat. I don't want to sound like that's an awful thing, but go to the gym, do your thing, go home. So I'm normally I try to go when there's a small crowd, so midnight, 2 a.m., something like that. So the front desk person, I can't remember how how does any conversation start, right? But we ended up eventually on the fact that he's looking to, he wants to learn how to program. Who doesn't? Who doesn't want to learn how to be a programmer? So, especially in the age of no code, you can be a programmer by not being a programmer, I guess. I don't know. So we were talking. He said, what's the best way to learn how to, now he's not starting off cold. He's read a lot of books, and we were talking about learning styles. I personally like to learn by selecting a goal. Like, say I want to, a little coffee. You should be having some too. Say I wanted to write let's pick one. I wrote a war dialer when I was about 16. So I would like to write a war dialer. How do I do that? So I basically pick the goalpost and then decide how I'm going to get there. So in that case, it was super, super duper easy. It was send some, what do you call them? AT command strings to my modem. And so just have it, pick a prefix, and then so a couple of loops, and I'm dialing thousands of phone numbers and recording. I would print out whenever I reached a carrier. I'm sorry, not a carrier. Connect tones, right? Whatever I connected. If I recall correctly, the response to a dial command would be a connect, and then the speed. So basically, if I got that versus, I think it was no carrier was the, right? Yeah. So it's been a while, but that was the thing, right? So rather than learn everything I needed to know about AT command strings, or I wrote it in BASIC on my Apple IIe, so that was, I kind of knew BASIC already, so that wasn't a big deal. But another time I was given an opportunity to work for a company called Ideate remotely. They were in Houston, I think, and I was in Phoenix. And they needed someone to write some Python or actually start off with some existing Python code to parse through some logs and do some other, they had this was early in their history. They had several, it's a fuel additive company. So they had several fuel additive setups in different gas stations in the middle of the United States. And like Oklahoma, Texas, a couple of other states. So say it was like 50 places, and they would get, they used UUCP, Unix copy, to copy protocol, I think it is, to send updates to a server at each of the gas stations. Then the server would communicate with each of the fuel pumps and the additive management hardware. So there was a little embedded system with a display panel, buttons. It would capture, it would basically inject charges into the card processor. So that was interesting because I had done some credit card processing stuff at Hypercom. So anyway, so they offered me this task and I said, sure. I don't know Python yet. So here's your goal. And offering the language as a requirement is one way that reduces the number of choices I would make. But arguably the reason I am such a fan of Python was that first project. So anyway, so that's what I told the guy at the gym. He's an employee there. So he didn't really have any ideas. So his view was, I've read a lot of programming books. Every book I've read says to start off with something like JavaScript or Python or Java. So, and those are all fine choices. I guess for some reason, no books suggest starting off with Haskell or Erlang or Lisp. Maybe that's good or bad. Scala. But anyway, so he's on this sort of traditional track to probably the books he's reading are aimed at web development, web apps, basic, write your Flask or Django app on the server side. He was not familiar with cloud. Anyway, so those are the finer points. So the important part, though, I said, however you choose to learn, if you're going to read a lot and then do some hands-on, maybe you have a like a curriculum that you will follow. Maybe you prefer to, here are 25 steps to learning JavaScript. Step 1, the hello world equivalent, document print or whatever it is. Okay, document write. It's been a while. Excuse me. So the other direction I offered was my preference, which was you could pick an idea and then decide how you want to get there. And if you think that JavaScript and Python, which I would say are two fine choices, front end JavaScript, although lately, I guess he has an iPhone, so I guess that's probably it. But lately, Flutter is getting a lot of attention for cross-platform. So Flutter from Google might be another interesting choice. But either way, JavaScript for the front end, not a bad choice. And then Python for the back end, server side, sure. Those sound good. So what do you think about starting from the idea and moving towards tool selection and implementation? Path to implementation. And so that was the interesting part, right? Because I want to learn how to code is sort of a can of worms, right? Like there are computer science majors, or there are boot camp courses, which I'm not a big fan of, or there are books you can read, which he's done. So those are learning style. Those are homework or hands-on or exercise. But when you get to the point, either first or later, we say, I want to do this. Okay, well, that's something that's an engineering problem. That's not an academic problem. That's like, okay, we need to solve you don't have this application, and that's the problem. So let's solve it. So we ended up ideating. And I probably did it a little bit more because I've done it more. But I would say it was a lot more time than I was planning on spending not exercising at the gym. But probably an hour of a conversation was, what kinds of things are you familiar with? What kinds of previous jobs? What kinds of interests? Things like this. And we ended up with two ideas that they're not intensely complicated. They're reasonably straightforward, and they're good learning projects. They would make use of your basic, to get them started, basic, sign up, log in, possibly accept payments. But getting a prototype running, you don't have to, you can have people sign up, sign in. So you're learning about, user authentication, user authorization. You are building basic web interface. He may want to go with a native interface eventually. That's why I say Flutter or maybe React Native or something like this, right? So, but the fun part was the ideation, and that is something I was reminded, because I think anybody who has been enjoying their time working from home, maybe you were on Zoom calls and maybe you were in Slack. And for both of those things, I hope you're okay. I'm not really a fan of either. I actually was, for a consulting project, they had a Zoom. Did they use? I think it was Zoom. Zoom or Google Meet. I can't remember which one, but it was a video meeting with six or eight people, Monday, Friday. So Monday it was, hey, how was your weekend? Chit chat, go around the virtual table, and then any sort of stand up, any problems, anything, any issues. And then it was, here's what we want to accomplish this week. So you basically set up your sprint goals. So weekly sprint. You've heard me mention that before if you've listened to my previous Quoggling Sand episodes. So a 5-day sprint, technically 4 days, I guess, or maybe even 3, depending on how you look at Monday and Friday in this scenario. But so we'd have this call. I think it was like 10 a.m. Mountain time or Pacific time, or Mountain right now. 10 a.m. I think maybe 11. So get the day started. I think it was lunchtime for the Houston folks. So whatever time that was here, 2 hours difference. So we had the meeting on Monday, and then on Friday it was, how did the sprint go? What are you going to do next week? Not so much working on the weekend, although I lean that way. I'm kind of all the time. And it was during the pandemic, so to me, that was not a big deal anyway. And I was billing hourly, so that was fine too. So to me, I'm home growing my potatoes, so why not? So Monday, Friday, and then they used Slack and Confluence and Jira and Bitbucket. And the consulting company I was working with was using Zulip. So there's no shortage of typing messages and sharing ideas, and sometimes some the term would be mansplaining, although it wasn't always man-splaining. But it wasn't so much ideation as arguing or some sniping sometimes. And so, that was not a healthy environment. So to me, ideation is a lot of blue sky. It's a lot of obviously this is Ideate. I'm not coming up with anything new here, but when you're ideating on a problem, it's not about shooting things down. It's about realistically, grouping ideas into possible and probably not, things like this. So the ideation collaborative interaction is something that has been difficult to come by during the work from home pandemic era. And it's mostly because I think if you're an employee of a company and you're in these Zoom calls, or you're doing your Slack or your whatever your meeting culture / tool set is, pardon my allergies here. whatever your process that your team or your whatever your infrastructure is, that process is part of your workflow, but I think it might not always be a part of ideation. Like how do you brainstorm you can't brainstorm in text. I think that's tricky. So Slack or a chat, if you're IRC fan, or if you are, which is Slack is just IRC, just so you know. So if you're typing ideas, or you are maybe you have like a shared whiteboard, or maybe you are using a Zoom call and your camera is pointing at a whiteboard or at a sketch pad or something. So you can sketch ideas, and you can, and that's, I think that's possible. That would probably take some practice, but I think just the ability to bounce ideas around, and sometimes the idea. So in the case with the gym this morning, and I think so. Say when I say this morning, I mean probably at this point it's maybe 4 a.m. So I've been awake for a long time. The guy working there has been awake for a while. So we've established the fact that he's interested in learning and doing, let's just say front desk at a graveyard at the gym is not the steady state career. It's more of a beginner. So yeah, by the time I actually headed up to begin my workflow, we basically had spent time coming up with what his interests were as a first project, possibilities, and then making a couple of guesses about, some pain points to address, and some product ideas that could be projects that could turn into things that people would actually use, which would then be both a learning experience and a usable goal, right? And then how to, what to do next. So at the end of that time, it was very interesting. And I think that's the part where ideation is hard to schedule, and it's hard to constrain. And that's where the Zoom call, unless you basically have an open or a like a meeting room that you can just go, hey, anybody around? Do you want to like have an open-ended video chat, or however you want, chat or meeting or whatever? Just, hey, I have this idea, or I have this problem I want to solve, and ideas for solving it. So that whole process, and it's something that I think if you've ever been to a hackathon, I've been to plenty, and sometimes a team of one, but often 2, 3, 4 people will show up at a hackathon, especially if there's free stuff. I mean, hey, why not? And they will bounce some ideas around based on if there's a theme, or based on the hardware selections or the software tools or the prizes sometimes. So they bounce some ideas around. Sometimes I was at a first build hackathon many years ago, and the team that came to there were several teams, groups. So I'll say team was like they prearranged their collaboration, who was on the team, who was doing what. And sometimes it was more loosely, hey, you want to go to a hackathon? Sure. So a group of people kind of show up, and they happen to know each other, maybe, and maybe they'll work together, maybe they won't, who knows. So this team showed up, and they ended up sitting right across from me, where I had I was the team of one from Intel, and I basically brought some hardware, and I was there to support people, mentor / technical support, I suppose, which was cool because I was on the development. So very rare at Intel to send product development people into customer interaction scenarios. So we had the developer, what was it called? DR something, developer relations, I think it was. And they would go to hackathons usually, and I would go along with them as the the sort of hands-on, like, oh, he actually worked on the product. He probably knows the answer to that. So it's at the Hackathon. I had a table right across from me. There was a convection oven. First Build was doing kitchen hackery, right? So come to First Build for the weekend and hack on appliances and, smart living. One of the projects at the end was a kitchen cabinet mounted farm. You could grow small amounts of vegetables in your kitchen cabinets. So the lighting, water, nutrition system for your kitchen farm. That's pretty cool. Anyway, so the group, the team that was sitting across from me was building a convection oven based coffee roaster. So you could roast your coffee beans at home in your convection oven. And rather than agitating the beans in the roasting process, they would spread them out flat on a cookie sheet, a flat sheet, metal. And they had several sensors that they would attach. They attached them to, end of the day, it was a Arduino Mega, the board with a lot of BIOS. And they attached like a dozen different sensors and to measure temperature at different points. And I can't remember if they were taking a gas measurement to detect, we'll call it caramelization, I guess. No, but as you're roasting the beans, you don't want them to start burning. So I did not dive into how they were implementing this. I was watching, and for better or worse, I was tasting the coffee that they were making. And as you know, and as I know all too well, you really are not going to get a great cup of coffee from poorly roasted beans that are roasted right before you. Now, I know there are Ethiopian coffees that you can roast and prepare, but you have to take that into account when you're preparing. Like a lot of coffee, when you roast it, you want to let it sit for a while, degas a little bit. So it depends on a few things. So the coffee was not good. The final cups, when they were getting the roast process dialed in, drinkable, but I would, okay. So either way, I ended up staying awake for 48 hours. So that was good. I was able to help people throughout. That was nice. So this team, though, they came with an idea. They ended up getting published in the news. They had this coffee roaster product, and First Build, when they were part of GE, now it's part of Haier, that was their thing, right? Come to our maker space and ideate and innovate and implement. And when you are done, perhaps productize with us. Hey, why not? So the ideation process is actually fun, I think. It's an opportunity to sort of, blue sky, or like you can throw ideas out that are silly or ridiculous because those might be rooted in potential possibility, right? I'm trying to think of a cool, let's see. To be honest, so I gave one idea that I presented to the person yesterday or this morning was completely and totally based on his background, his interest area, is aimed at his beginner skill set. So, but personally, I think it's a viable idea. So I was like, yeah, it's kind of neat. I think you should do it. The second idea was actually an idea that I've had bouncing around, but totally doable at a beginner level. And it kind of falls in line with some of the other things we were talking about. So not as related to his interest area as the first idea, but either way, the ideation process where you can just throw these ideas out is where you end up distilling things down to, let's invent a perpetual motion machine. Okay, that's going to be a really tricky one. But do we end up with some sort of a mechanism that will accomplish something that's interesting or fits into some other idea that somebody else throws out, right? So even though the spitball idea that you just threw out there may be a little weird or a little off, or maybe you're being funny, maybe after an hour or so you are no longer capable of completely serious ideas, but somewhere in there is a cool nugget that, and maybe you don't even isolate that down that day. Maybe in the morning, maybe the next day, maybe some other time, maybe the next ideation session you pull back maybe you have a notebook, hopefully. Remember you mentioned that perpetual motion machine. What if we and then you go from there, right? So yeah, ideation to me is probably the I don't want to say the funnest or the most fun part of the engineering process, but it's up there because it is arguably the reason that that most of the people I know pursue engineering in general. I mean, being a programmer is one thing, but like engineering is more about tackling problem solving, coming up with a workable solution, whether you're building a bridge or a rocket or a web application. So coder, programmer, those are interesting. You have your software architects, you have your computer engineers, you have your, obviously civil engineering. When you get deeper into these topics where you find someone who's like, yeah, I actually design systems. I don't just write native JavaScript, React OS. I mean, not React OS, React Native. React OS is something else. React Native or Flutter or even WebAssembly or straight JavaScript. There are people that can do that all day, and they write the HTML and the CSS, and they write maybe some Node backend or Python or whatever. And that's fine, and I'm not diminishing that. But when you actually architect something, when you apply some engineering principles, when you experience will tell you over time that you build in testability, and then you start exploring, what happens if a user of my whatever it is encounters a problem. How do I capture that experience that they're having? How do I either they file a bug or are they going to email me and try to describe something? Time and time again, I have issues with Kroger. And if I contact support and I ask them, I'm using the Kroger website, right? I'll say I'm visiting the website. This is not displaying correctly. And it's not cosmetic. I mean, a balance for a savings thing or some coupon expired and it shouldn't have, whatever the case. And the support person will often refer to things from the UI, as in go to the account menu and my list, and then go to the left side, describing things geographically. And I say, can you just give me the URL for what you're talking about? And I will try to determine. And they say, there is no URL, which is funny because there usually is. So they just don't know their product. So the point of that is there are people, developers, support people. There are people that work with technology that kind of work at the cursory, the upper layers, and they don't dig down deep into where the engineering has taken place, right in the engine room, down in the lower decks. So I think it's fun to build it up and to have the working system and all that. So the ideation phase is where you can kind of let things go a little crazy, because you're going to be down in the engine room later trying to build the parts that actually will be reasonable. And that's usually the implementation phase, which my new thing now is the ideate, innovate, implement is the 3 I's. I don't know if I came up with that, but that's my story. And so when you after you're done ideating, maybe you distill that down into, okay, well, here's how we can actually accomplish this. So you innovate. I could argue for a 4th I, the integrate. So you innovate, integrate, but that breaks the laws of three. So the law of three. So ideate, innovate, come up with how you're going to probably integrate, and then implement, which does not sound as pleasing to the ear as ideate, innovate, integrate, perhaps. But implementation is where it's at, and so you got to build something at some point. And that is where I get totally stuck because I have too many ideate, innovate seeds planted, and I end up spending all my time lately learning about event source models, microservices, just so many ideas about the implementation phase. And if you suffer analysis paralysis, then you are in a infinite loop of explore, consider, ponder, learn more, pros and cons. Those will kill you. Like, here are all the reasons you shouldn't use event sourcing. Here's all the reasons a monolith is fine. Here's all the reasons that microservices are going to kill you and make your life better. So there's no shortage of these presentations, and they are much more roll up the sleeves and do things based on decisions that will have long-lasting impact, which are a little bit more heady, whereas the ideation phase, you can blue sky all day. Nothing you are saying, that perpetual motion machine, you don't have to actually build it. It's when you get to the point where you've said, oh, wait, we're making that. Oh, that's going to be a while. So it was a good time. It's been a while since I've had a sort of a blue sky conversation like that, and they should happen more often. And I think if you have good ideation interactions early on, if you say the idea that you were going to do in your ideation phase with others who are similarly creative and yet rational, you will probably come away after 1, 2, maybe 3 sessions. Maybe you do it over the course of a week or a month, but you will come away having distilled the ideation. Maybe in the innovation step, you'll come away thinking, maybe it wasn't realistic to maybe that perpetual motion machine is not going to work out, right? But if you don't have that interaction, and there's a story from Mark Searle that I found humorous when we were doing America's Greatest Makers, which is a story I'm sure I'll tell at some point if I haven't. The reality show. That's a longer story. But Mark Searle from Berkeley Haas does or was, I think they've left Haas to be like a separate entity. But at the time, we had Berkeley Haas folks come in and talk to our contestants about how to develop a plan for your product and your pivoting and your product market fit. It was really America's Greatest Entrepreneurs, but again, different story, different day. So Mark Searle offers this story to people. He says they had a conference of some kind. There was an audience, and at some point there was a Q&A or some sort of customer audience interaction, and somebody in the audience was describing this company product. Often those are the same things early for some. So he had this thing. He felt it was the next big thing, and it was if you can imagine, maybe like a horseshoe style, or was it they used to have these bone, what do they call it, the bone phone, these speakers that would hang around your neck. So just imagine some sort of a retaining horseshoe wishbone shaped thing. It's around your neck, down with the left and right half down on your chest somewhere. And his idea was, when you are sitting, perhaps lounging on the TV couch arrangement, you could have a keyboard on either side of the wishbone on either arm or the horseshoe or whatever you're envisioning right now. And you could use that to type if you're texting on your phone. And it might even be that there was a phone stand as part of it so that you could literally be reclined and texting on a tablet or a phone or writing, whatever. So probably you are having a reaction similar to the rest of the audience because apparently, and again, this was him retelling a story. So Mark is describing this and he says, when you had this idea, did you tell other people or did you ask people if they thought this was a good idea? And he said, I've just been working on it for the whole time and I've spent a lot of money and time and built prototypes and all that. And so Mark said, we asked everybody in the audience if they thought this was a good idea. I have no idea what the size of the audience was. I don't know if it was a rousing, but that was the result, was the room, however many people, kind of unanimously agreed that it was not a great idea and it was not something that they would use. They could see that for this person, it met some need that he had, but it was not the game changer that his spend suggested that he thought it might be. So the take home, as Mark was describing, is like you should have your ideas, but you should get some kind of feedback. You should try to determine if there's a viability, product market fit. Are you being disruptive, but within the boundaries of the familiar surprise, which is a Lowy, I can't remember his first name, the Maya, minimally advanced yet acceptable, I believe is what that stands for. I'll stick some show notes in there about the book. And there's a YouTube TED Talk from an author who wrote about the designer, Lowy, I think it's Frank Lowy, and his concept of the familiar surprise. So are you being too outlandish? And if you've ever heard people say, oh, it's the Uber of pizza delivery, or it's the Facebook of photography, or whatever. I mean, so basically what people are saying is, I'm going to take the thing that you are working on, the new product or service, and I'm going to compare it by way of this analogy, metaphorically, if you're a simile metaphor person, it is the something of something we all know. So the familiar surprise is, what Uber is. This is the same thing, but for food delivery. And obviously that eventually became Uber Eats. But, so maybe this guy's horseshoe keyboard thing is like it's the Etzel of of keyboards. It's like a not a great idea, and we've taken it a little bit further in the wrong direction. So yeah, the familiar surprise, the innovator's dilemma, which is a book I'm reading right now, which is actually pretty interesting. Maybe I'll link to that as well. So innovator's dilemma, Lowy, and the familiar surprise, and Maya. These are all things that come around maybe in the innovation and implementation phase, where you determine, especially during innovation, right? Part of that innovation should be viability, right? When we come up with this new idea, is it actually usable? Is it actually appealing? And the familiar surprise idea, basically, yeah, you want people to not be too put off by something weird, too strange. Maybe with food, right? If you designed a new snack, how often do you see a new snack? How often do you see, like, in America, seaweed crackers, which are, I'm trying to remember the name, but they're very popular in Hawaii. But on the mainland, in America, there are some people who will appreciate seaweed rice cracker snacks. I'm spacing on the name, but I was exposed to them in college with my roommates, there were some snacks that they had that I was not a big fan of, but the rice cracker with the seaweed, those are good. Those are a little unusual for some people, but if you took a familiar snack, so rather than the rice crackers with the shoyu, the soy sauce, and the seaweed, which is an unusual, unexpected set of flavors, if you took seaweed and you wrapped it around rice with not Spam, because that's a little unusual for, again, the non-Hawaii crowd, but I've had what is musubi with, if you put some sausage in there, right? Oh yeah, sausage and rice. Okay, what's this? Seaweed? So most of it is familiar, and then there's this little unusual wrapping around it. And honestly, if you've eaten a hot dog, seaweed is not a big deal. So the familiar is a good introduction. The surprise is literally the surprise. So if you are too innovative, if you're too disruptive, you run the risk of scaring people off or getting the product fit wrong, product market fit, right? So, hey, we have this brand new, and there's the iBot wheelchair from Segway guy, who I really got to remember his name because I keep spacing on it. But when you innovate outside of that box of familiar, surprise, Maya, or how about it's something that we could actually use, you end up with a product that seems neat but doesn't work for anybody. So I think that happens all too often. So ideation, spitballing ideas with other people, which is something I've been missing, is, I think, critical. And it's something I actually hope to do more often, because otherwise I have lots of ideas, and then without a project manager or a collaboration development partner of some kind to bounce ideas off of and split efforts, you can't really spend too much time experimenting, or you can spend all of your time experimenting. Difficult to reach the later stages of a release cycle if you are spending all your time on the innovation and implementation steps without getting out of that loop. So that's been my experience anyway. So I hope I remember everything for the show notes. Maybe I got to jot these down soon. So let me get to story time, and maybe we'll come in under an hour today. So I'm going to tell you, this is completely true, and it will sound at first as though it's a sad story, but it's not, actually. So I used to work at True Vision. If you are familiar at all with Avid or with Pinnacle, or the Targa video format, I think it was a file format, really. It was initially it was motion JPEG video, then it moved to MPEG. So the container, the Targa file, the product of True Vision. True Vision was a company founded initially by the likes of AT&T and others to do video conferencing. Now we can do that without even batting an eye. And there's so many things. We used to have to set up disk RAID stripes, right? RAID 0, 6 disk arrays over SCSI 3 on usually it was like an 840 AV Mac. If you remember those, the 68040 with properly implemented NuBus slots. We used the Addo SCSI 3 controller and these stack arrays, the fastest drives, and just to capture compressed 720 interlace, 720i video. Now, where are we today? 4K on your phone. It's ridiculous. Anyway, so we're there. We're doing video. That's what we're doing. Colleague in sales named Adam. I don't know if I should say his last name. I will not today. Well, it's not bad, but I haven't talked to him forever, so I don't want to open that can. So Adam comes over to me and says, I heard you're departing True Vision. I said, yeah, I'm gonna go work at the Newton Group at Apple. Yeah. So after I departed, Adam, I think at that time, I think his wife had, I think they had just had their first child, or they were about to. So, and the husband, both Adam and his wife, were from, and are still from, Great Britain somewhere. So he said, I have this idea. So after you have left the company, because I think he was planning to leave also. So to keep the intellectual property boundaries, I think we met at a Starbucks. Starbucks in Santa Clara. It was I can't remember. It was a place where a lot of people would meet, because it was near where Yahoo used to be in Santa Clara. It was actually quite near the Intel, that sort of main campus of Intel. I can't remember the name of the place. It had a movie theater. It was kind of a new strip mall thing, but the Starbucks there, it seemed to be like a mini epicenter of startup ideation. Speaking of, so we met there, and he said, I have this idea, because we have our child now. At that point, we have a child, and both of our parents live in Great Britain somewhere, and so we have to share picture. Grandparents. The grandparents power the internet. If you when it comes to just simple things like, I want to hear from the grandkids. So messaging, pictures, video sharing. You think it's TikTok or various adult content, but it's mostly grandparents. They want to see the kids, the grandkids. So he says that, we want to send them video, and at this point, again, back in those days, you're recording video on a camcorder, right? Maybe it's a little what was it called? They had these small mini tapes, or maybe it's a full size, whatever the tape format was. It was pre-digital, so he's not recording to Betacam, although he could have, because we certainly had Betacam hardware all over the place. So he's recording video on a tape, and he's capturing it probably with his Target 2000 capture card on his machine. And then what? Then what do you do? He's like, you can't really email video. It's too big. The files are too big. Remember, this is the old days. This was like 1996, 97, 98. That's probably important. I'm not even going to look, because I know it will be close, but it was right around. We'll get there. So he says, I've obtained some seed money. I want to say it was about 50 grand. And I have several former colleagues and friends and whatnot. And we have this notion, and he wanted to call it share video. Share video. I want to be able to share video with friends, family, and his end goal, and so this gets back to probably, this is why I selected this story, really. He had a goal. The goal was not, hey, I want to make a thing to share video. It was, I want to send video of my child to her grandparents, both sets, in Great Britain. So across a large distance, unknown internet connectivity, probably modems, who knows? Dial up, right? So here's what I want to accomplish. And there's a product in there, and there's implementation, and there's tons of innovation. So we gathered at his home at some point. I want to say it was like 10 people sitting at a table, long table. There was probably snacks. And we ended up arguing about something as ridiculous as whether it should be Flash-based. Things like this. It was a lot of, the ideation phase was not blue sky. It was very subtractive. How about that? So it was not an additive session. It was very subtractive, and it was frustrating. And it was a harbinger for what would eventually come of this effort, which was ultimately giving some of that, whatever remained of that initial seed fund, back to the seed investor, because most of the people that were in that gathering that day sort of peeled off like, this is not going to work. This is ridiculous. I don't like the idea. After this discussion, I don't think it's going to work. I don't think I can work with these people, whatever the case, right? For myself, it was very frustrating to have that subtractive environment, right? So instead of throwing out an idea and building on it, it was throw out an idea. No, that's a bad idea, right? That, to me, is not a successful way to ideate. And again, this was this was very early. This was gathering people together, meeting for the first time, and throwing ideas around. And that's, yes, that is where you're going to establish your team fit. What is your team culture going to start to look like? You're planting the seeds of a coworker relations, right? How are we going to collaborate to accomplish this? The end goal of getting Adam's parents' video of his child. So, end of the day, it kind of fell in on itself. And, shortly after, this crazy thing called YouTube springs up out of nowhere. Like, what? What is this exactly? And as you may recall, it was a separate company that Google acquired. But it was just this startup, people making their own videos. I don't know where Justin TV fits in there, but the whole notion of live streaming was going to follow soon after. So share video was ideation that killed itself. And as it turns out, you would think, oh, you could have been, but when you really think about it, even if YouTube didn't come out for another year, they were working on it already. And whatever they did, I don't know any of the founders or early teams, but clearly their ideation was more successful. And YouTube today is a different beast. That's a different argument. But at the time, they were able to deliver this platform. And again, I don't know exactly what the delays were and the timing exactly. It was sometime after our sessions collapsed and the share video idea went back to the furthest back burner in the kitchen behind the house behind their house, right? It was way back. So share video essentially dead. And then YouTube launched. So whatever that interval was, there was no, and I will say at the time it was, we could have, but honest reflection, going back in time, that team had their act together. They had their idea. Ideation worked. They were able to innovate and clearly implement and launch. And at the end of the day, they had a successful product on their hands. And we probably would have had something that got those kid videos to, and not to diminish that, but grandparents would have been happy with what they received, but productizing it, So, an interesting learning experience to be sure, and I cannot stress enough, and really, whether you are listening to this or not and thinking, yeah, or no way, that's dumb, I'm really just reminding myself of this because ideation in a collaboration environment, actually bouncing ideas off of other people, and especially if they're not like my ideas, okay, that's fine. But to have someone who has like the inklings and to tease that out into like, oh, you know what you could do, and it's I don't normally like to say, you know what you should do, or like that sort of advice is sometimes tricky. Like, oh, you're thinking about changing your diet, you know what you should do? Yeah, I don't like to go there at all. Or you're at the gym, hey, you know what you should do? You should do a set of, no. Those are usually better in the form of, here's what I do, and you can do whatever you want, but this is what works for me. However, in the ideation phase of a project like this, I think it's fair more of a, you know what you could do, but yeah, because you're just bouncing ideas around. And I think that happening more often, I know for me, but in general, I think that's where the good stuff comes from, is from additive conversations about new ideas, turning them into, I used to tell people that a hackathon is where you start with an idea and you end with something in your hand that you can touch and play with and show people. And so the ideation phase of that is critical, because you may come up with something that you can't even turn into something you can hold in your hand and play with, or maybe you can, but that first step, that's the longest journey. That has to start somewhere. So that is my story. And what can I say? I had an idea. I ran with it. It's 55 minutes later, and here we are. So I'm going to leave you with that. I'm going to turn around now and jot down some of the links that I suggested. I hope I don't miss one. And I thank you for listening. I thank you for subscribing to the show. I thank you for taking the newsletter, which is where I stick the show notes. It is easier than trying to fill in the RSS description text. This show and the other shows I'm currently a part of, the FFS Talk podcast, which is also me talking. And both FFS and this Quoggling Sand podcast are totally guest friendly, and hopefully also will be live stream chat friendly, because some of the things that I've been talking about, I hope we can talk about and possibly have some sort of a Q&A or drop in, whatever, all the current coolness. And then the Hugo Floss podcast, which is my mother and myself. My mom has been a podcaster for more consecutive recent years than I have, probably more consecutive total years also. So we do a random podcast. We've had 2 guests so far, one each on 2 different episodes. So that's it makes it more interesting to have that conversation. So if you're tired of listening to me, but you think this is interesting in general, then come on down. So you can email me here, dhugo, DHUGO, @quogglingsand.com. You can also reply to the newsletter email, which I believe is quogglingsand@substack.com. But you could just email. They're all going to go to the same place anyway. So yeah, drop me an email. Tell me you want to link up and have a conversation about something. The Quoggling Sand podcast is about just, well, arguably it's about ideation, implementation, maybe some innovation in there somewhere. Like, what are you working on? What am I working on? Some random ideas, and maybe this turns into an ideation platform or forum, right? Like maybe, it'd be kind of fun to have like a random call-in style and just basically do what we did at the gym this morning, right? It could be as simple. I'll give you a very quick version of ideation, unexpected ideation. If you've ever used Lyft or Uber, you have probably heard a driver comment on the surge pricing and the percentage, and when there was the rate reductions, especially the big one that happened several years ago where Uber cut their prices by like 25% or 50% or something. It was around the holidays, and it was a competitive move, and it really screwed people over because they had leased expensive vehicles, and suddenly now they're barely making their lease payments. So I used to say, what if the driver community created their own platform that was a competitor to Uber and Lyft that was owned by the drivers themselves, and you enabled direct connection with your clients, with your customers, clients really, and where the client could actually, hey, can Joe come and pick me up, or can Ann get me at the airport, or whatever, right? So you develop these relationships with your customers. And sure, here in Las Vegas, a lot of times that would be a tenuous weekend relationship with Somebody's in town for 3 days and then they're gone forever. However, they also may come back. And so rather than just being a pool of drivers that are handing over a non-trivial cut of their efforts to a company that is just connecting a client and a service provider and taking a cut, and you would think that's trivial. And yes, they did a lot of work on the legal front, and yes, they cover insurance for $1 a ride, and so there's some upsides. But is it possible to compete against that? Sure. After all, you're the people doing the work. So my version of ideation with the driver would be, what if you did this? And what if the drivers got together and you could set your prices and there would be a market rather than a price set from on high? It would be bidding perhaps, or there'd be some sort of a reasonable interaction with clients and all this. So ideation on the spot is kind of fun, but we could certainly do that right here on Quoggling Sand. Why not? So drop me an email. Subscribe to the newsletter, Twitter, Quoggling Sand. There's an Instagram, which I really should start posting to, but the social media side of things is a frustrating morass of political and flame war, cancellation, all this silliness. This is why I like the idea of podcasting, talking to people, and bringing the discussion into an interactive forum like this. So Twitter, meh. But there is a Twitter for Quoggling Sand, just in case. But drop me an email. Let me know. Join me. Have a discussion. Let's ideate. Come up with cool ideas. And maybe you want to implement them too. That's up to you. And I know I have a lot on my plate. But let's make some stuff. All right. Thank you for listening. Catch you later.